Hello and welcome. If you're new to my channel, I make videos about living with a 40-item wardrobe, as well as some home decluttering, and today I want to talk about one of my favorite topics, which are color palettes. Now, a question I get asked fairly regularly is how to create a minimalist wardrobe that isn't all black. And so first I want to spend a little bit of time unpacking that question, and then I'll share my tips for how to create a color palette of your own. So if you've never created a capsule wardrobe and you haven't started decluttering your wardrobe, and part of what's holding you back is a fear that you might end up with an all black closet, let me rectify that right now. So first of all, it's really easy to type in the words colorful capsule wardrobe or colorful minimalist wardrobe into Google or Pinterest, and you will see a lot of examples of small colorful wardrobes. So if that's what's holding you back, you have a lot of examples at your fingertips, and even if those examples aren't necessarily perfect matches for you, if it's not the exact color palette that you want, then those can at least serve as a proof of concept that it is possible. If we dig into that question a little more, I think that part of it comes from the assumption that minimalists wear very monochromatic, sort of all black or all white outfits. And just by a quick image search, we can prove that that is not always the case. But I do think there is some truth to it. And part of it is that if you have a really small wardrobe, then you are more likely to have a more intentionally limited color palette. Another factor, I think, is that minimalism is a mindset, and the more you practice it, the more you become skilled at separating what's important from what's not, and what you want to be sort of the point of focus. So if you wear, let's say, an all-black monochromatic outfit, black and darker colors tend to be very heavy, they sort of evoke power, and if you think about color composition, imagine you're looking at a photograph, your eye isn't drawn to the shadows, it's drawn towards the lighter and brighter points of interest. And so if you're wearing all black, then people might be less likely to focus on your clothing and more likely to focus on you. Similarly, if you're looking at an all-white monochromatic outfit, white tends to sort of be calming and serene, and it can also evoke confidence. And I sort of imagine Diane Keaton in an all-white suit, and it can also say, I'm rich because I don't have to worry about cleaning this. I think we could talk about all black and all white for a very long time, but the point is, there are some advantages, there are some sort of intentional effects that wearing a more monochromatic wardrobe can have that some minimalists lean on, but that's not always the case. To use myself as an example, I currently have 42 items of clothing, and I will list off all the names of the colors that are in my wardrobe over here for you to see. Now, this may seem like a lot of color, but I think what's more important is how you distribute that color throughout your wardrobe, and how you do that is entirely up to you. You can have fewer neutrals and more colors, or more neutrals and fewer colors, and again, that is totally up to your preference. But I think one thing to consider is that if you're working towards a smaller wardrobe, having a smaller wardrobe means that you're going to be wearing your items in heavier rotation and in more combinations with each other. And so leaning on more neutral or muted colors has its advantages because you don't notice repeats as often. If I try to summarize me rambling for a little bit, I think the point is having a minimalist wardrobe definitely does not mean wearing monochromatic black all the time, but it does mean being more intentional about the colors that you include in your wardrobe. So with that, let's talk about how you can build a color palette of your own. Now, if you've never created a color palette for yourself, I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is that a clearly defined color palette, or even just a minimalist wardrobe in general, should be an edited and intentional version of what you already have. So like so many things, I recommend you start defining your color palette in your existing closet. Now, of course, you can just open up your closet and sort of stand back and think about what colors you look best in and what you wear most often, but to make this exercise a little more real, what I recommend instead is opening up your closet and then pulling out the top 10 or 20 favorite items of clothing that you have, gather those together and see if from that there are color patterns that jump out at you. Take a picture of it so you can study it later and then put those items back. Now repeat this exercise, except this time pull out your top 10 or 20 most worn items of clothing. Now, there could be some overlap between your most worn items and your favorite items, but they're not always one-to-one. So I think it's good to do these exercises separate. Now, once you have your top 10 or 20 most worn items out, do you see a different relationship of color there? Are you pulling entirely different things? Are your favorites different from what you actually wear? Now take a picture of that and then pull out all of your favorites that maybe didn't make this cut so you can see your favorites and your most worn items next to each other and sort of get that full picture. I also recommend taking a picture of this just so you can study those colors later, but this should give you a fairly clear indication of what a good starting color palette for you should be, because these should be your favorite items, the things you wear most often, the things that you look and feel your best in. So try this and use this as a foundation for your color palette. Now that you have your foundation, this step is not at all required, but if you've never created a color palette before, it might be useful to start grouping the colors that you ended up with into their respective categories. Now, I think about color palettes in sort of this framework of base or neutral colors, main colors, and accent colors. And so again, if this is a new exercise for you, it might be good to look at what you've ended up with from your closet exercise and start slotting your colors into those categories. So for your base or neutral colors, these are really your staples, things that you wear all the time, colors that support other colors in your wardrobe. Typically, these are things like black, white, gray, maybe browns, tans, camels. Those are sort of base neutral colors. Next are your main colors. These are the colors that you wear all the time, kind of your signature colors. And then finally are your accents. These might not be things that you wear all the time, but they really add some pop and interest when you do wear them. Now again, this step is not strictly required, but I do think it can be really useful if this is your first time creating a color palette, because it can help you to decide how to distribute color, which we talked about earlier, and that has a major impact on sort of outfit and color repeatability, and is all the more important if you're building a small wardrobe. Now, as you construct your color palette, it's also really important to keep in mind how well the colors in your palette coordinate with each other. Are they cohesive? Are they supporting each other? So if you walk away from the closet exercise with, let's say, the colors black, charcoal gray, navy, and icy lavender. Well, the icy lavender is not cohesive with the other colors. It's not as supported by the other colors as those other colors support each other. And so you're going to run into some wearability challenges down the road if you don't make sure that your color palette contains colors that are easy to coordinate with each other. Another thing to keep in mind is how well the colors in your color palette work with your own coloring. Now, I'm not going to get into cool, neutral, and warm undertones. There are plenty of resources online if you don't know what kind of undertones you have and what colors look best on you. But I think it's worth spending a little bit of time, if you don't already know, to investigate what colors look best on you, because that's going to keep you satisfied with your color palette over time, because those are going to be the colors that actually work with you and look good on you. And just spending a little bit of time on these 2 points up front can save you a lot of grief down the road, because you're creating some rules that you can adapt over time and that you know are going to continue to work for you. Now, if you do this and you're feeling a bit of shell shock at having such a limited color palette, I think it can be good to take a step back and consider the motivations for having a limited color palette in the first place. And for me, there have been 3 main advantages. The first is that it made it a lot easier to let go of items in my wardrobe that fell outside of my color palette. Secondly, adhering to a color palette made it really easy for me to coordinate outfits, because everything I own is already a part of the same color palette. And third, shopping is incredibly easy because I can ignore everything that falls outside of my color palette. Another thing that made it easier to accept having a more limited color palette for me was realizing that I didn't need to include every color I looked good in to have the wardrobe I looked my best in. And finally, I realized that I didn't have to wear every color I liked in order to show that I appreciated it. For example, I got rid of every purple item of clothing that I had. I love the color purple, but I don't feel like it's a color I look my best in. And so I got rid of those items, but I still can appreciate purple. I have purple curtains hanging in my bedroom and other purple accents throughout my house. So you don't need to actually wear a color in order to show that you appreciate it. All right, those are all of the tips that I wanted to share with you today, and I feel like this was a rambly video and that I only scratched the surface in talking about color, but if you've hesitated to declutter your wardrobe in the past for fear of it being all black, I hope I've assuaged some of those concerns and given you some tips for starting a color palette of your own that is as colorful or not colorful as you want it to be. I mentioned this before, but creating a color palette I think was one of the, or perhaps the best strategy that I've employed that's helped me to minimize my wardrobe and really maintain it over time. So if you haven't already given some thought to creating a color palette for yourself, I really recommend it. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.